Hello and welcome, gamers. Kubes here. Today we're going to be taking a look at inventory management and Quickswaps in Elden Ring. Now, there are some similar videos on YouTube or other parts of the internet covering this topic, but what I've found that some of them have in common is that the creator is using a function like Cheat Engine, or they've had friends or community members drop items for them. And so what you'll find sometimes is that they have maybe 30 duplicates of a specific weapon or a specific shield in their inventory that they can easily swap to. And while I don't have anything against the players that use Cheat Engine or have community members or friends drop items for them, it doesn't seem like it's very practical or realistic to the everyday layman gamer. And so I wanted to try to provide some insight and tips to be better optimized or organized when it comes to our inventory, so that we can have more success in our invasions and or duels. So thanks so much for being here. Hopefully you take something away from the video, but at the very least, stay awesome. So getting started, of course, what we want to do is unequip all of our talismans and place them into our inventory. We're going to be using the function to sort by order of acquisition in order to better organize and have an optimal setup for managing our talismans and or weapons. And when you do so, that's going to give you access to 6 rows of 5 that will be visible on screen when you first open your inventory. That means that you have 30 items to work with, 30 different tools that you can use at your disposal. Now, I'm not saying that you have to limit yourself to that much, but using any more than 6 rows is going to mean that you're going to have talismans and or weapons that are off screen and that you'll have to cycle down in order to see them. Somebody like myself who has multiple characters that they like to invade as, it makes it easier for me if I can just see everything on screen. Oftentimes I find that you're not going to need more than 30 talismans. Possibly maybe you need more than 30 weapons at your disposal, but it seems like a good number. And you know, typically you're just going to be swapping from maybe a handful of talismans, and then the others that you have on hand are really kind of like the old adage, you rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So just think about what sort of things you might want to have at your disposal just in case the situation arises. Now, in many cases, there are going to be maybe 1 or 2, possibly even 3 talismans that are pretty much essential to your build and that you're not swapping as often. And so typically what I'll do is I'll place those in the 3rd and 4th talisman slots, and I'll position those in my inventory in the top and bottom corners on the right hand side. It just kind of places them out of the way, and so it frees up the middle of my inventory to have easier access when I do need to make my swaps. And then I'll place my talismans that are in my 1st talisman and 2nd talisman slot. I'll place them towards the middle of the inventory, so in the 3rd row up or the 4th row up, and that means that I have a lot of access to swaps which are 1 button press away, or I can also use the triggers, the left and right trigger, to jump to the bottom or the top of the page. So in this example, you'll notice that I have my Bullgoat's talisman kind of in the center of the page, and then what I've done is I've placed in the same column as my Bullgoat's talisman, I have a handful of talismans that are all related to healing or getting some sort of HP back. So within 1 press, I have access to the talisman that's directly above the Bullgoat's talisman, the talisman that's directly below, as well as the talisman that's directly to the right-hand side. And then I can also use the left and the right triggers to jump to the top and the bottom of the page. That's going to give you a lot of versatility in terms of jumping around very quickly without needing to do a handful of button presses in order to get to the talisman that you're looking for. Now, something that I've found works for me is to place the talismans that I might only use very briefly, but that are still important, at the top and the bottom of the page. So here I have the Crimson Seed talisman at the very top, which I can swap to pretty quickly if I need some extra healing from my flask. And I've also got the Cat talisman at the bottom of the page, so I can easily swap to it if I want to avoid some fall damage. Because these talismans are going to provide a benefit in the short term, but not necessarily in the long term of my invasion or my duel, I like to have them kind of within 1 button press, but not necessarily directly next to the main talismans that I'm using. So I still have quick access to them, but they're not clogging up the center of my inventory, making it free for me to maneuver around to other talismans fairly easy. And then another useful swap that I've found is to place something like the Concealing Veil and the Turtle Talisman at the top and the bottom of the page in the same column as another one of my talismans that I'm swapping often. So here I have the Star Scourge Heirloom, and if I press one button I can get to the Turtle Talisman. If I press another button I can get to the Concealing Veil. Those are two talismans that I might swap to for maybe a minute or two before swapping back to the original talisman if I need to. And so again, it's just about considering what options you swap to often and how you can get there easily. Now, another small adjustment that I found helps me in better organizing and managing my inventory is I've placed the talismans that help improve my resistances or my elemental defense towards the bottom right hand of my inventory, and then I've placed the talismans that boost my damage, whether it's my Ash of War or maybe jump attacks, for example, towards the left hand side of my inventory. And that just kind of mentally allows me to easily know which direction I'm going when I get into my inventory to make the swap. It helps me know, okay, I know I'm going to go to the right hand side if I'm doing something for defense, and to the left hand side if I'm doing something for offense. And even though I don't necessarily know specifically where the talisman is located, like whether I need to press 2 buttons or 3 buttons to get there, I have a general sense of which direction I need to head when I get into my menu. The next thing that I wanted to touch on was utilizing your tool belt and the quick access toolbar. So you have access to 4 different items when you hold down triangle or Y, depending on which sort of controller you're playing on. And I found that it's very helpful for ease of use if you have your flasks in the quick access tool belt. So holding down Y and or triangle in order to get to your flasks will really help you kind of deal with some of the congestion that can happen sometimes when you have too many items in your tool belt. So when you invade, you're going to have additional items added to your toolbar, like the Phantom Bloody Finger. You might also have the Phantom Great Rune, and so you're going to have more items there that you have to kind of navigate through in order to get to the item that you're looking for. You might even have something like boiled prawn or crab, and so just having less items in that space is going to be better for you in the long term. It might take a little bit of practice, but if you can train yourself to utilize those quick access slots for your healing flask, for your FP flask, and for your Wondrous Physic, that's going to help you better get to the item that you need when you need it, rather than fumbling through your inventory or having to hold down on the D-pad in order to get to what you're looking for. So I did want to briefly touch on organizing our weapons. Now, in the same way that we have access to 6 rows for our talismans, we have 6 rows for our weapons as well. And same sort of principles will apply in this sense. You want to consider what is your main weapon or weapons, the handful of weapons that you're using the most, and you want to place those towards the middle of your inventory. So whether it's the 3rd row up or the 4th row up, that's where you want to have your primary weapon. Some people might consider this your root weapon. And then you want to think about what sort of swaps you want to have at quick disposal, whether it's up, down, left, or right, as well as using those triggers again. So right trigger is going to take you to the bottom of the page, left trigger is going to take you to the top of the page. What I've found works for me personally is placing my ranged weapons towards the bottom of the page. Things like my hand ballista, my bows, as well as my seal and or staff. I'll place those at the bottom of the page so I know that I'm pressing the right trigger to get to those items. And then I'll place a row of shields at the top of the page so that again I know that I'm getting to those items with the press of the left trigger. Kind of makes sense to me mentally. Typically you're shooting with the ranged attacks, and that comes from your right trigger or right bumper, and you're blocking with the shield or maybe parrying, and that comes from your left bumper or left trigger. The basics of it are just kind of keeping things organized, and a little bit of this will be kind of trial and error, figuring out what items go in what position for you. I typically like to swap between a shield and a secondary sword, so I've found that placing them right one button press from each other works for me personally. So hopefully these small tips could help you become a better duelist or better invader. Thanks so much for being here. I have been and always will be Kubz. Peace and love, gamers.